Poker and business have a lot in common. Both are not about winning, and the bad players often do not know which kind of game they're actually playing. My name is Jan Heidmann. I'm Germany's best-known poker expert, and part of the reasons for that is that there's only 3 of us. But also I spent a long career in the poker industry, and I'm going to talk about strategies of a poker player, optimal decision-making under uncertainty. The question that I get asked most as a poker expert is probably, isn't poker a game of pure chance? Isn't it only luck who wins? And I have a very definite answer to that question. The answer is, it depends. It mostly depends on the time horizon that we're looking at. For example, if we're playing one hand of poker, you against me, it's only about the cards, it's only due to the cards who wins that hand. If we play 100 hands of poker, which is a good long night of poker, then I can already employ some of the strategies and incorporate some of the knowledge that I have about the game and improve my chances. But everybody who has played poker before knows that in one night, everything can still happen. If we play 10,000 hands of poker, you have absolutely no chance. After playing 10,000 hands of poker against me, the probability of you walking away with more money than you came with is approximately 0. Why is that? Let's look at a game of poker. We're playing Texas Hold'em No Limit. It's the most common, most widespread form of poker today, where everybody gets 2 cards just for themselves, their whole cards. Then there's a betting round. Then there's 3 cards as community cards in the middle of the table, the so-called flop. Then there's another betting round, a 4th card, the turn, 1 more betting round, and the last card, the river, and a last betting round. And if we look at this real closely, well, we have 4 betting rounds. We have 1 before the flop, 1 on the flop, 1 on the turn, and 1 on the river. And if we look at the game closely, then we realize that poker is not a card game. Of course, there's cards involved, but we don't do anything with them. Unlike bridge or Doppelkopf or Skat, some German games, there's no tricks that are played out. The cards don't get exchanged, they're not collected, they don't get added together for points or anything like that. The cards in poker are just received and evaluated. And the game actually happens on a completely different level. This is a picture from the 70s, from the biggest poker tournament of all time. Well, it has grown to be the biggest poker tournament of all time, the World Series of Poker. It's been running the longest, it's the most prestigious event, and it still runs every year in Las Vegas. And the guy at the right-hand side of the table, with a bald head, he's a legend in the poker business. His name is Doyle Brunson, and he still plays, over the age of 80, he still plays in the highest stakes against the best players in the world for the most money, and still very successfully. And he also wrote one of the first books on poker. The book was called Super System. It was published in 1977. It was one of the first books I read, and it was one of the first books to talk about strategic concepts that good poker players use to defeat bad players. And the first sentence in that book is, poker is a game about people. And I added a little bit and said, poker is a game about people and their decisions. So let's see what kind of decisions poker players take. There's always something to be won in the middle, that's the pot, and you have to risk something in order to win it, either by betting or, if somebody else bet, by calling or raising. So in essence, poker players take thousands and thousands of investment decisions each day. There's something to be won, and you have to risk something in order to get it. And because of that, poker is a wonderful microcosm for decision-making, where you can extract some concepts, some models, and apply it to the real world in business or in any other kind of decision. So investment decisions are characterized by 2 factors: uncertainty and incomplete information. Uncertainty because we cannot predict the future, we cannot know what the future brings exactly. We can plan for some scenarios, we can calculate some probabilities, but we do not know what is going to happen exactly tomorrow or next week, and we do not know which card is going to hit the poker felt next. In poker, uncertainty is represented through the cards. We can't know which card is going to appear next, although there's not an infinite number of possibilities, so we can do some calculations. And the incomplete information is provided by the opponents in poker. My opponents are not going to tell me their hand, their cards. They're not going to tell me what they're going to do with them, and they're not going to reveal their entire strategy to me. So for me as a poker player, I fight against these two big enemies, uncertainty and incomplete information, each and every day. I'm going to present some concepts to you, and you should look at them as a sort of toolbox. Just take the tools that you can use. Just take the tools where you say, well, that's kind of like the decisions that I have to take in my business everyday life, and take them home with you and remember how the poker player would think about them. The first concept that I would like to talk about we call tight aggressive. Tight refers to the number of hands that a poker player plays, and aggressive to the way that he plays them. So a very good poker player or a good poker player only plays about 20% of the hands that he gets dealt. That means that 80% of the time I look at the first two cards that I get, and when it's my turn, I throw them away again. You could say that I've earned a living by throwing cards away better than other people, and it would not be wrong. Why is that? Well, not every investment opportunity is actually a good and profitable investment. Most of them are not very good at all. We have scarce resources that we want to invest, so we can't just invest in everything that comes our way. We need to be selective and disciplined and wait for profitable investment opportunities. I gave a talk at a media consulting firm or a media firm that sells old school paper advertisement in phone books and that sort of thing. And they had a very good example for tight aggressive strategy. There was one representative, and he went through a street, and in one day he would have like 10 different talks with people that he would like to sell advertisement to, or some website renovation, or some website optimization. And he had an appointment with an eye doctor where he would try to sell him a new website and some SEO, some website optimization. And he went into the meeting, and the meeting went well the first couple of minutes, and then he said, well, we're going to optimize your website for Google. And then the eye doctor got loud and said, well, Google, I don't want you to name that name anymore in this conversation. And the media representative, he was struck, and he said, well, if we're talking about SEO, we have to talk about Google. And the eye doctor jumped up and said, you said Google again. Didn't I just tell you not to mention that? And then the salesperson got up and said his goodbyes and closed the meeting down. And when he told me this story, my first reaction was, well, couldn't you have turned it around? Couldn't you have saved that client? And he said, well, sure, could have at least tried, but the worst thing that could happen is that this guy actually signs a contract, and we have to work with him, because we're talking about a website which is not a large contract, and we would spend months and months talking with this guy about where to place the button on the website. So it's a huge waste of resources. It's probably not going to be a profitable investment, and we should take our resources and find other clients that are a better fit. So a big part of the tight aggressive strategy is actually to let go of the unprofitable investment opportunities and lose the least with bad cards, while winning the most in the good situations. And then you're going to turn a tiny little profit. The second concept you might know from the real estate market. In real estate, there is a saying that a property's worth is determined by three factors: location, location, location. And in poker, it's a little bit like that. A poker situation depends on position, position, position. What do I mean by that? Poker is played clockwise. which means the people act in turn. So there's always a person that has to act first, and there's always a person that gets to act last. And from the wording, you can already gather that I prefer to be the person who gets to act last in a poker game. Why is that? Because when it comes to the time to make my decision, I have much more information available. If you're acting last, you can watch all your opponents, what they do, who enters the pot, how expensive it is going to be before making your decision. So you have a superior information. And imagine that you're always entering negotiations with superior information than the opposition. Then negotiating actually becomes a lot of fun. Doesn't mean that you're going to win all of these negotiations, but it means that you're going to win way more than with worse information. So a poker player always strives to find and develop good positions and avoid bad positions. How does he do that? In every single poker hand, the position for that hand is fixed. There's a button, and the people act in turn clockwise from the button. But poker players, good poker players, they play a lot less hands out of position in bad positions. So for example, in early position, you would play 5 to 7% of the hands. In late position, you would play 40, 50, 60, sometimes 100% of the hands, averaging out at 20%, but they're not all equally distributed. Poker players try to develop good positions and play way more in position than out of position. Of course, some of the times you cannot really control that. Sometimes you enter negotiations and you have the worst information. Sometimes as a poker player you play in early positions because you have good hands, but then of course you're at an informational disadvantage. When I am in position, I use it. When I'm out of position, I respect it. It's very important to realize that sometimes you don't have the information advantage, then you have to at least respect it. Position at the poker table comes in a lot of different forms, and so does the information advantage in business. We talked already about the position relative to the button, meaning when is it my turn and how many people are able to act behind me with superior information. But that's not even the most important position in poker. Another position is relative to the other players. Imagine you have a specific player who plays very conservatively, meaning that he only plays absolutely superior hands when he enters the pot. Let's say we take the extreme example of a guy who only plays aces before the flop. So he always waits until both of his first two cards are an ace. This happens every 221 hands, so almost never. And I would love to have that person sitting directly to my left. Why? Because that is a position where he has the information advantage over me, but he's never going to use it, or almost never. Only 1 out of 221 hands is he even entering the pot, making it more difficult for me to play against him. So in essence, if I have this guy to my left, I have the best position 2 times each round. I have the button, which is the best position in poker, twice each round, where everybody else only gets it once. Because once I have the button when I have the button, and I have it another time when he has the button. Another player type, or aggressive player type, who plays a lot of hands and he plays them very aggressively, and he's hard to read, he's hard to understand his strategy. That guy I want to have on my right, because if he's entering a lot of pots, that means that I am going to be playing a lot of pots against him, and I want to use the informational advantage by being on his left side and getting to act after him. But even that is not the most important position that a poker player thinks about. The most important position is which table am I going to sit down, at which table am I going to compete. When I'm in a casino in Las Vegas, there's usually a number of tables available at the level that I play at, and I am always very careful to choose the table that I sit down. Sometimes there's only one seat open, but I still have my eye on the other tables, and I walk around from time to time to see if there's a better table available. Because most of the profit doesn't come from playing the game, perfectly and playing certain situations perfectly, but it comes from choosing the right table. A pro tip here is always go for the loudest table in the room, because that's the table where the people are having fun, they're drinking, they're talking about sports and politics, and they're not really focused that much on the poker. And you can also have some fun and also talk about some politics, but focus on the poker a little bit more and just make a lot of money. Also, when you're the 10th best poker player in the world and you only play with the 9 other people, you're going to lose money. If you're number 3,000 and you're going to play against the 10,000th poker players, you're going to print money. And as a company, you always have to revisit that question and ask yourself, well, what is the market that we want to be competing in? I just talked to some startup investors, some VCs recently, and they said, well, we're never going to invest in an idea that directly competes with Google, Facebook, and Amazon, because there's just no point. They crush that market, they have a much better position, and they're going to crush the opposition. So we rather find some another team with good ideas in a completely different market that they can crush in the future. One of my favorite examples also is Nokia. Nokia used to be the #1 in mobile phones and mobile telecommunication until 2007. And they started out doing something completely different. They started out producing working boots, basically shoes. And at some point in time, they switched from that table to a completely different table until they were forced to switch tables again because of the advent of the iPhone. And by the way, when Nokia saw the revelation of the iPhone, I think the CEO of Nokia at the time said, well, we're not very worried because Apple, they don't know this market at all. They have no information how this works. They have never done that. So if they sell 1 million iPhones, that's going to be great for them. But we sell 1 million phones a day, so we're not very worried about them. Well, it's true. Apple really didn't know anything or not that much about the market, and they had no experience. But they had such a good product, such a good hand, such good cards, that the position in that case didn't really matter that much. And it turned out that they were selling 1 million after 1 week. And we know what happened to Nokia afterwards. The next concept is one of my favorites. We call that, in the poker lingo, we call it level thinking. We already said that poker is a game about people and their decisions. And I'm always trying to get into the head of my opponents in order to figure out why they take the decisions the way they do. And the first level, as a beginner, you pretty much only think about your own cards. You look at your hand, you have a queen and a 7, you don't know if that's good or not, then the flop comes and you hit something or you don't, but you're very much preoccupied with your own cards. As an amateur, as a more experienced player, you know what you have, but you start thinking about, what does my opponent have? If he plays the way he plays, if he raises in that spot, what does he have in his hand? Professional players, they take it one step further and they think about, well, what does he think that I have? And this is the point where we leave the game of cards and we enter an information war and an intellectual fight. Because now it's not about the cards anymore, it's about, what does my opponent think? How can I get into his head? If I know that my opponent thinks that I have a good hand, I can win the pot. He thinks I have a good hand, he checks, I bet, he confirms that I have a good hand. He says, well, I knew it, the Heitman has a good hand, and he throws away his cards. Do I need a good hand for that? No, I just need to have figured out what my opponent is thinking. And on a world-class level, it gets even more complicated. It's about, what does he think, what I think, what he think, what I think, what he has. And it gets very, very complicated. And interestingly, it's solved by math. So you concentrate on game theory, optimal play, and don't even think about what your opponent thinks. We're not going to go into the game theory stuff that would blow up the timeline a little bit. When you invest in a poker situation, when you bet, or if somebody else bet and you raise, so you voluntarily put more money into the pot, there's only 2 good reasons for that. Either you have a very good hand and you are hoping to get paid by a worse hand, then we call this a value bet. Or you have a bad hand, but you figure your opponent's hand isn't that strong either. He's going to throw away a better hand, and that is, of course, called a bluff. Now, a little disclaimer here. Most of the time, when people bet in poker or when they invest in real-life situations, it's because they have value. They're trying to generate more value by betting a good hand. Just some of the times, bluffing is involved. Amateurs always think that poker is all about the bluffing, but in fact, that is not true. So anytime you invest, you should be thinking, well, am I generating value here? Or am I getting rid of a problem? If neither of those is the case, it's probably not a good investment. I talked at a consulting firm a couple of months back, and they applied this sort of concept to their budgeting. They were active in about 7 areas, and all of the 7 areas got the same budget. They got the same piece of the cake. And after thinking about this for a little while and hearing the talk, they say, well, maybe that's not optimal. Maybe we should be investing much more of resources into the areas where we're really good at. And if there is an area that is more or less breaking even for us, it's probably still going to be breaking even if we take away some of the resources and some of the energy that we spend. And if there's an area where we're actually losing money, well, we shouldn't be funding that at all, or we should fund it much more aggressively in order to get better really quick. Solving a problem using a bluff. Now, let's talk about why it is so hard to make decisions sometimes. I talk about decision making a lot, and I realize and I get the feeling that a lot of people don't really like making decisions. The main reason for that is, of course, the fear of failure. If you're a decision maker, you could make a decision that leads to an unfavorable result. And people are very afraid of failing, so they avoid, or they're afraid of making decisions. We're going to do some poker math. Not a whole lot. Don't be scared. Don't turn off. It's going to be real simple. Let's say we have 100 chips in the pot, and our opponent bets 100 chips. So now at this point of the decision, we can risk 100 in order to win 200. The 100 that was already in the pot and the 100 that our opponent bets. Now if we do this a million times, or let's play it out for 3 times, we get to the following conclusion. Let's say the first time we risk the 100 but we lose. So from the decision point onward, we're down 100 chips. The second time, same thing happens again. Maybe we were hoping that our opponent was bluffing, but he wasn't. We lose another 100. But the third time, finally, we get to win the pot, which is 200. So now we're breaking even. Which means that 2 out of the 3 times we lost, 1 out of the 3 times we won. That means that with a winning probability of 1/3 or better, so let's say starting at 33.3% and better, we should invest in this situation to play the game optimally. If we have a winning probability of 34%, we should be calling. Otherwise, we're losing money, or we're not picking up all of the profits that we can. The same with 35% and so on. So this is very trivial from a mathematical point of view, and this is how poker players think at the table and how every investor should think about his investments. But there is another thing that can be learned from this, because at the fringe decisions, when it's the closest to breaking even at 34% of winning, we still have to pay with 34% winning probability. But that means that at this decision, we actually have to be losing twice as often as we're allowed to win in order to play the game optimally. I'll say that again. In the fringe decisions, we have to be losing twice as often as we are allowed to win in this particular example. And we could even change this example around a little bit. Let's say there's 1,000 in the pot and our opponent bets 100. That means that 11 times we should be losing for every 1 time that we're winning. And of course, this doesn't feel good. As a poker player and as a human being, it doesn't feel good if you're investing money and then the opponent gets the pot. And if you do that 11 times for every one time that you actually get the pot, it feels really bad 11 times. You almost never win, and the other guy always gets to have the pot. But this is only because we're focusing on the results and not on the math and not on the decision-making behind that. So we can actually learn a lot about failure. As a poker player, you're failing every day. There's nobody in the world who's good enough to win every day or to win every pot. So failure is to be expected. In business, of course, it's the same. If you're always taking decisions under uncertainty and incomplete information, meaning you cannot know what the future brings and you don't know enough at the time of the decision-making, well, you shouldn't be surprised that sometimes your decisions lead to unfavorable results. So failure is to be expected. Not deciding is also not an option. You have to decide. I talk in a lot of companies, and I hear a lot that, we're not going to take that decision right now. We're going to postpone it. We're going to look at it again in 6 months. And then the people think that they haven't decided at that point. But in fact, they have decided. They have decided in favor of the status quo. So no, not deciding is never an option. Failure is not necessary, but it's going to happen a lot. Failure shouldn't be the goal. I hear that a lot in recent years. Failure has become the thing, and everybody talks about failing fast and failing quickly and failing more in order to learn. But it shouldn't be the goal. I mean, you're going to fail no matter what. You're going to fail often enough so you can learn when you're failing in that. But it should not be made a goal. And results are just momentary flashes from the past. And this is a real game changer. I said at the beginning that poker and business, they're not about winning, and that the bad players often do not know what kind of game they're actually playing. In game theory, there's two distinct types of games. There's a finite game and there's an infinite game. In finite games, you have a set of opponents that stays the same, you have a set of rules that stays the same, and you have a point in time where the game finishes. So, for example, soccer is a finite game. After 90 minutes, there's a whistle, and we have a winner and a loser. And the opponents are clear, and the rules stay the same. Tennis is another example. There's no whistle, but after somebody wins 3 sets, the game is over, and we have a winner and a loser. Infinite games are different. First of all, the competition changes. So there's players leaving the game, and there's also players entering the game. The rules change over time, and the game goes on indefinitely, hence the name. In infinite games, the goal is never winning. You cannot win an infinite game. You cannot win the game of business. You cannot win the game of poker. It always continues. So the goal cannot be winning. The goal is to keep playing. Something that a poker player never does is put everything on one card, because if that card doesn't come, you're broke or you're dead or something like that. A good poker player would never do something like that, because he knows he makes his profit from making better decisions than his opponents. So if he keeps making better decisions, he puts himself into a situation where he can keep making better decisions than his opponents. He's going to make a profit for a very long time. In business, it's the same. You cannot win the game of business. I always have to smile when there's some sort of ranking published, and then companies pat themselves on their back and they say, well, we're #1 in this ranking. And I always have to smile, because it's an arbitrary ranking. It could be, I don't know, it could be margin, it could be number of employees, it could be market share. There's so many different kinds of ranking, and you just find the one where you're #1, and then you're happy. And it's not like everybody and all the competitors agreed that, December 31st, congratulations, you're #1 in this ranking. We stop the game now. Here's the trophy. You won. No, the next day, business is going on as usual. If you talk to poker players and you ask them, well, how was your day? The bad ones, they always answer, well, I lost 500 or I won 300 or whatever. And the good ones, they only concentrate on their performance. So even if they won a tournament, you're going to ask a professional poker player, how does it feel? They always comment on their performance. They say, well, I played really well. I'm happy with all the decisions I took. Obviously, variance was on my side today. I had great competition, but I became the winner. And they know that tomorrow there's the next tournament. Yeah, it doesn't stop. It's an infinite game. It just keeps on getting played. So, if the goal is not winning, what are we focusing on? As poker players, we only focus on two things. First, I want to make better decisions than my opponents. And second, I want to make better decisions than last month. If I keep making better decisions than my opponents, that means I'm playing profitably and I can continue to play. If I'm making better decisions than last month, then I learn continuously. If I play profitably and I learn along the way, there's nothing that can happen. As a poker player, we only focus on the decision-making process and never on the results. We don't care about the results. We know that if we make better decisions, the results are going to come by themselves. So thank you very much for investing your time and your energy today for this webinar, and I'll leave you with two sentences. Results only describe the past and decisions shape the future. If you want any more information, just shoot me an email at info@janheitmann.de and I'll get back to you.